Hi to the LinkedIn audience. My name's Scott Walker. I'm a managing director with Mantle Advisors and Sentinel Resource Group. And I have with me today the one and the only Ray O'Hare. And I'll let Ray, although he doesn't need to be introduced, I will let Ray introduce himself.
Hey, now
Tell
wait
us
a
about
minute. We
yourself.
didn't plan on doing that. So, well, let me follow that up. Hello, everyone, and yes, I appreciate Scott's comments, and we're actually here for you, though. We think very strongly about transitioning from the private sector to the public sector, or vice versa, but mostly from the public to the private. And there's lots of things out there that are interesting today, and we'd like you to know about them. So we have three or four things we're going to cover, and then we'll probably take a break for a week or two and come back and finalize on another topic of social networks and developing your talents on LinkedIn and elsewhere. So Scott, what do you think about our first topic of how do I get started? I want to
Yeah,
go from the LAPD to a CSO. How do I
that's
do
right.
that?
That's right. Well, as Ray knows, and for folks on LinkedIn that don't know, I work probably on a weekly basis with people who are transitioning from the military and from law enforcement to do that successfully. What does that look like, and what kind of considerations should they have on top of my normal duties as a managing director, right? But this is something that both Ray and I are passionate about. Both Ray and I come from a law enforcement background, and what we want to do is set people up for success. And so we get this question constantly, which is how do I start? How do I even get out there and put myself out there? What does the corporate sector look like? And we're going to talk about that. But one of the things that I generally tell folks is to start with understanding where you want to go. Geography plays a big role in how I talk with people that I'm talking through this transition process. And I don't know if that's the same thing for you, Ray, but I find it a real challenge when I have folks that it's usually military veterans or military members that are in. I had one veteran who was overseas in Europe, and he wanted to come back home to Texas, and he was looking for a corporate security job in Texas. But his resume had U.S. military base X in Germany, right? And so to potential employers, it looks like he's a German citizen. He's not an American. They maybe don't even read down past that. So one of the challenges that I have with folks, especially who are geographically different than where they want to go, is, and this I think will play in a little bit to our discussion about how COVID has affected these kinds of challenges. But I think the thing that I run into a lot is first you got to identify where do you want to go. Not so much an issue in COVID world, as we know there's a lot of people working remote, but that's kind of where I start with them, is not so much a focus on their resume or even who they are yet, but because I'll have people who are like, I want to work, I want to be the CSO of a big tech company, but I don't want to move to California. Okay. We got to do it. There's some discussion we have to have there because that's kind of the tech mecca. I don't know. Have you had a similar experience, right?
Yeah, no, I think I feel for the people because it's a big challenge, and you work and you build a career and you build a reputation in whatever sector you're in, local, federal, or state, and or the military, and now you say, okay, I think I'm going to retire next year. So certainly we want to talk about getting started early and kind of figure out what the guidelines are, what the landscape looks like, and a couple of things that stand out all the time. If you apply for a job today, and no matter what your background is, and if it's a CSO or a high-level security role, there's going to be a minimum of 300 to 400 resumes for that job. So when there's 300 to 400 resumes, now you have to get that narrowed down to one or two. So how do you do that? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And 300 or 400 is actually conservative. And then the second thing about that you have to remember is that you have to file for that job electronically so that the companies can comply with their regulatory issues. But so now your resume is going to be screened electronically. So that means when they do that, there's a word search And if you don't hit those word search names that they're looking for, you're never going to hear another word about it. And that's a horrible thing, and um, it's very irritating to know that you applied for a job and you never heard another word. So lesson number two, if you apply for a job and you've done all your research, the next thing you have to do is you have to get around that electronic filing. And if you stick with us for a while, you'll hear what we have to say about that as we go forward. So so I think that's kind of a good thumbprint of what maybe they should start thinking about and what have you. And I like what you said about the location, especially as it relates to COVID today. You maybe don't want to go to Boise, Idaho, or
That's right.
maybe you do want to go to
Maybe
Boise,
do.
Idaho. But I would say, and I would tell everybody that I talk to, don't worry too much about the location of the job today. It's especially as it relates to COVID, as we know in the last year, but even beyond that, there are many people that are not at a company location in the corporate security arena. So while it might say Boise, Idaho or Pocatello, Idaho, don't worry too much about that until later on, and we'll tell you what that might mean later on.
Do you find that there's an expectation that when folks are coming out of, specifically, I find this with law enforcement folks, but they're coming out of a 20 plus, 30 plus year career with one entity, that they expect to land in the Google, Apple, Toyota, Microsoft for the next 20 years? Can you talk a little bit about that? And you have had an amazing career. And so the reason why I bring this up is because not even you stayed in one company for, a ton of time. And maybe this is the longest you've ever been in the company now with AS, but I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, you have to have lofty goals,
Mm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And being positive about yourself and having a good attitude. And what I find is that we try to realize that the credentials that we have today that we're putting on a piece of paper actually would be attractive to the hiring manager. Now, in some cases, the hiring manager may not necessarily be a security practitioner. It may be somebody else. The recruiter certainly is not a security practitioner, and that is a challenge and that is a hurdle.
Right.
And so I actually talked to a fellow the other day, and a federal retiree who had a great career, great credentials, and he followed that up by doing something in the state that he lived in another 5 years, and he was miffed that he sent a resume to a job that I happened to know about, and no one ever said anything. And he was miffed about that, thinking, how could they ignore my credentials? Well, first of all, I said, maybe no one ever saw your credentials because the
Mm-hmm.
electronic screening screens you out, and that's the end of that. But at the same time, I'll remind again everybody that's watching, the recruiter that's talking with you may not know what FBI stands for, or they
That's
may
right.
not know that a DS State Department employee is actually a real professional security person.
That's right. That's right.
You have to just stick with this, and at the end of the day, you have to remember it's not you, it's the process. So you have to think long and hard about that, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about researching where you think you might want to go to work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important what you're nailing. We'll talk about culture more here soon, but I think identifying the role and the right role for you and the right role for the company, this isn't unlike dating, and it's more about you finding a place where you're going to fit in and less about how much money can I make, how much stock can I get, what are the perks of the job, because the likelihood is that you're there to 3 to 5 years if you're a true security leader, and then you're gonna cycle into something else. You're gonna find a bigger, better role. How much does you talked about certification or certifications? How much does that play in 2020 and beyond now. Do you find that's more important to be certified in the industry or to have some type of industry recognition as we kind of as people, there's going to be huge transitions over the next few years with security leaders.
I'm the wrong person to ask about certification because I've been a proponent of certification for way too many years to remember. But I will say this, and I say this a lot today: having a certification in our industry demonstrates your forthrightness in going after something that benefits you. And so then you say, well, which one is that to have today? And I wouldn't really distinguish between too many of them, but if it requires an examination and requires credentials to get that examination, then that's one that you should do. If it's something you send away for and now you have 5 letters after your name, that probably doesn't hold as much weight. And I also say today that if you're considering a certification, you probably should consider something that has to do with cybersecurity. As maybe your lead certification, or if you already have a certification and you really think you need another, try to get that one in there, maybe the CISSP, or something along those lines. And that just demonstrates that you've done something later in your career to advance your personal knowledge and skill set. And now you're competing with others that might have 2 or 3 certifications that you don't have any. So give that some thought. And remember, this is not the federal government. This is not the city police department. It's corporate America.
But what do you say, Ray, when somebody tells you, "But I've been through NYPD SWAT school. I know everything there is to know about security." Well, do you get that? What do you say to that?
I have a pat answer for that. And I say, so, Scott, you say that you are the best homicide investigator in the United States of America because you did this and this and this. And I say, Scott, let me just remind you that if there's a homicide in corporate America, they're going to call 911. They're not going to call you. Nope. So those skills themselves are not necessarily transferable, but the skills that are transferable are what you've done in your career in managing people, managing a budget, finding goals and meeting those goals and setting strategic initiatives. So don't be offended by that, Scott, because it isn't about you.
I agree. And especially when it comes to investigators, I usually tell them that they have the requisite skills they learned from detective school, which is you have to identify key constituents or strategic leaders within your organization, and you need to build relationships with them. You're not going to get anything prosecuted if the DA hates you, or doesn't, they see your search warrant come across their desk and they're like, I'm not going to even put this forward because they know you have a bad reputation. That's going to be the same way in the private sector. And so I think a lot of our folks, me included, when I transitioned about almost 7 years ago, I had a lot of misplaced arrogance about the private sector, that this was easy compared to law enforcement. And certain days are easier than others, but my understanding of business was zero. It was less than zero compared to where I am today. And that was only because when I figured out really quickly that I had misplaced arrogance, I corrected that and I started listening more than I spoke. And how much do you think business acumen play in transition?
Oh, it's tremendous. And really, if you were a captain in the Marine Corps and you want to get promoted to commander or whatever the next thing is, or if you're in the PD and the same thing, you're a lieutenant, you want to be a captain. You have to research that and prepare for that. So in the corporate America, I'd say a couple of things. If they're a publicly traded company, you can research them till the end of the earth and learn a lot about them. What's their culture? How do they make money? Where are they located around the world? And there's a federal report called a 10K SEC report that talks about what the company's risks are. So, for
For
example,
publicly traded companies, by the way.
correct, only
Yeah.
for a publicly traded company. So, for example, if the organization is a manufacturing company and they have one location in China that's subject to flooding and shutting down and what have you, that product line is at risk.
That's right.
So it would be nice for you to understand that and understand why it's at risk, and then maybe potentially what some of the mitigating issues are. So as you think about that, um, it's hard to understand what the company culture is because you're not an employee. But I'll give you a good example. A friend of mine is in the process of interviewing now, and I think he's on his about 11th or 12th interview, all of which COVID wise are done on a panel on Zoom or
On
something.
Zoom.
So after about 10 or 12 of those, I said, do you really want to work at this company if they're going to spend that much time interviewing you and you're really no further ahead than when you did the first interview? And
Wow.
it's really, it's something to think about. So how you get treated by the interview process, the recruiter and what have you, is as important as your skill set in giving them something that they want from you. And it's really a trade-off. So if you're not treated fairly, don't blow that off. It might not necessarily be the end of it, but remember the recruiter is just a recruiter. The recruiter is not the hiring manager. So you want to get close to the hiring manager, and if you feel uncomfortable or what have you, that's where you could air those thoughts out.
That's great. That's great advice. I'm going to pause us here because there are other topics that we're going to talk about here in the very near future. We're going to talk about corporate culture and how to understand that greater and dive into that some more. We're also going to start talking about social networks and what does that look like? Because obviously a lot of our law enforcement friends don't want to have a social network profile, and how does that play into the transition discussion? But to the folks that are watching this, send us your questions. Send us if you want us to talk about something. I mean, I could go on with Ray. We could do this for the next 2 weeks straight, and you have so much knowledge to impart. But I want others to also tell us what's important to them and what kind of things do they need to talk about. But not only are we going to talk about your social network, we're going to talk about your network and what does that mean. I have the opinion and the framing, and I'm going to ask Ray, and this will be answered in a future kind of posting. But I definitely think we should talk about how that network plays into transition, and I think that the network is so important that more than likely you will get the job coming out of the Marine Corps, coming out of LAPD, coming out of the FBI from somebody who you know, and or somebody who has referred you to somebody else. It'll come through some type of network connection, not shotgunning your resume out there 1,000 times a day. That's not going to be the future, I don't think. But so Ray, let's pause here, and we'll pick this up in the next posting. I want to thank you so much for one, being a mentor to me throughout the many years that I've known you, and look forward to watching your success grow and listening to your wise anecdotes of how folks can transition and do this transition successfully.
Yeah, you know what we need Scott, and I know Scott agrees with me on this, that we don't expect anything in return for helping
Right.
someone. All we expect is that somewhere down the road, whether you're 25 years old and you're just starting, or you're 55 years old and you're looking for your second career, is just to help someone else. And that's the satisfaction that we get for doing this. So we appreciate your time and look forward to hearing from you. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks, and be safe out there.
That's right. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we're back. Ray, thanks for being with me. Happy Thanksgiving or post Thanksgiving. Hopefully you had a
Yeah,
good dinner with everybody.
yeah, absolutely. It was a great day in Las Vegas. The sun was shining all day, and it wasn't quite golf weather, but it was close.
Oh, yeah, a little cool for golf weather, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
today
we're,
we're going to talk about corporate culture, because that's both you and I, we've been talking about this. Get a lot of questions about, what does a corporation mean? Who do I work for? How do I do this? As they're transitioning from law enforcement into the private sector, it seems a little scary. And one of the things that I always start with is kind of the hierarchy of a corporation. And I'm not going to get into all the kind of the nits and gnats that I usually do with somebody who's a candidate, but the way I describe it to them, Ray, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this, is I talk to them about, hey, a law enforcement agency works for a government. The government is formed very similarly to a corporation. Instead of the CEO on a corporation, maybe you have a mayor or a governor or something like that, city council, and they're your leadership. And then it kind of all the component parts of a corporation do exist in municipal law enforcement entity. You've got an operations folks, you've got legal folks, you've got finance folks, and so on. But a lot of folks just don't even understand the hierarchy or the structure of a company when they're coming out of law enforcement. But I don't know if you get that question similar to that.
Yeah, so people see all these job descriptions that are out there floating around on Indeed and all the other networks that are out there. And, usually when I talk to someone the first time when they're looking, and you and I have thought about this, is they say, what's the salary? It's like, I have no idea. It could be
Yeah.
$1, or it could be $100,000. And I say, you don't even know who the company is or what they do or how they make money and so forth and so on. So it's kind of a fun discussion about why don't you, maybe you don't even want to work there. Maybe you have different values than they have or what have you. So it's just trying to position yourselves. And as we were talking earlier about, starting early, we talked a lot about starting early the last time, but part of starting early is assessing yourself, what your skill sets really are, and how do you display those, and how do you talk about those, so that when you have a conversation with a hiring manager, you can talk about a little bit about the company because that's where they work, and they're usually very proud of that. So I remember a while ago, I was with a former federal agent. I'll just leave that. And we were visiting a client in Chicago, and we were barely in the seat when he's talking about what we were trying to sell. And I kind of interrupted him, and I said, "Hey guys, do we have time to get a cup of coffee where we could chit chat a little bit, get to
Build a
know each other?"
relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And really, that's what it's all about, is having a bit of understanding. And I happen to be a Wall Street Journal junkie, and I never was like that until I realized that I had to understand the client business as well as I understood what I do. And people always accuse me of selling. And I said, I don't sell anything. I have nothing to sell. I build relationships. And it's actually pretty funny today because people are, as you know, reaching out every second with an email, can you check my calendar below and let's set up a call? And I'm thinking, I don't even know who you are. And what if we have a relationship? And yeah, I'm in 100%. But it's kind of interesting to watch the dynamics of all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, corporation, all that information about a corporation is online. It's there to be found. And if you're applying for a job and you haven't done some research on who they are and what they do and how they make money, as I've said a few times, you're remiss in that. That's because remember, the only goal about sending an application is to get a personal interview. You have to remember that. You've got to get around that system, and we talked about that the other day. So having all those things in your repertoire, in your playlist is very important.
When you talked last time about checking the 10K of these, if it's a publicly traded company, right?
Yeah.
And you look at the risks and you look at what they're doing to mitigate those risks, and if that falls within the job description that you're applying for, you might want to know that. You might want to know that they have risks in certain countries and or they have cyber risks or whatever. And are they putting any money into that? Because, to your point about, being a former federal agent, I obviously talk to a lot of federal agents and they don't quite understand that concept that, I might go someplace and there might be tons of risk in that job. And not just with the job, but I'm saying with the role of that job. And the company is not doing anything to mitigate that risk. They just want a figurehead in place to, when there's a problem, we'll call you, but we're not going to give you any money to your program to help mitigate those risks.
Yep.
If you aren't aware of that ahead of time, those are the questions you should be asking in the interview. What is, not just what the salary is, you'll get there, but what are the risks in this role? And is there a budget? Is there a head count? I've seen people land at major global companies, and their physical security budget was almost non-existent. It was enough to cover their contract security folks. Nothing for insider threat, nothing for business continuity, so on and so forth. So a lot of folks go into these roles thinking, oh, I'm going to hold the title of CSO or VP of security. Well, that's great. You can be a security director in a mall, or you can be a security director in a corporation. Those are two different things, and those are two different salaries. To your point about salary,
Yeah.
so going in there with your eyes wide open, finding out as much as you can about the company, and educating yourself about their industry as well. What you said was right on point.
Yeah. So I have a very close friend, and he'll know who I'm talking about if he watches this, and it will be him. But he was recruited some years ago, heavily recruited to go to, kind of the number one run company in that particular sector. Very visible name and what have you. And he kept pushing him back because he had a good job, and he finally caved in. But he negotiated 10 things, and seriously, 10 different things that he wanted to accomplish based on his research that he had done in the first year. So everybody was in agreement. So good and all, he starts, and a couple of items get knocked off the list, and then a couple of more items get knocked off the list. And after he got past 5, he said, "This place isn't for me." And he lasted about, I'd say, 4 or 5 months. And fortunately, the job that he left hadn't been filled yet. So he went back to his old position. So could he have figured that out beforehand? Probably not. But he had done as much research as you potentially could do. So, this is a negotiation, is the hiring process. It's bartering, and it's something for something. So those are all the things that you need to do. And then you have to decide if this is for you and your family and your potential career in your second career, maybe. So it's serious stuff, and hopefully you'll do hard work, and you'll listen to Scott, and don't listen to me, but listen to Scott, and you'll find that right job, and then everybody will be happy.
That's right. Well, we have more coming up. So we were telling people to stay tuned and send us great questions, and we'll see you in the next segment. Okay, so we're back, Ray. We're going to talk about how to develop your social media network or your social network. Because what we have been talking about is the next job you get, or these folks are going to get, are going to be because they've done their research, they've looked at the company, looked at the role, they've looked at the salary, hopefully you've been able to back into that somehow. But how did they even get there? And I think people are going to find that it's through their connections, their network. And your social media is a humongous part of that. Talk a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about, you've been fortunate enough to be in this industry for a little bit, and you've seen it evolve from pre-social media to now. There's social media everywhere, and everybody can find anything out about anything. Tell us a little about how that evolved. What's your feeling there? Do you think it's better now today than it was in the past? Is it easier to find a job because of social media?
Well, I think the social media is going to find you, is what's going to happen. And, recruiters are recruiting on LinkedIn today. And some of them, that's the only place they recruit. So, because of the backgrounds of our industry and the people that we're talking with and what have you, I know you don't want your picture on LinkedIn because you don't want to be found. You don't want to be doxxed and all the other bad things that happen today. But there's no alternative to that. So we talk a little bit about LinkedIn all the time, and LinkedIn is a two-way street. It gives you information that's important to you as someone searching for a job, and then you give it information which allows someone to then search for you. So, we all get connected in opportunities from a lot of people. And I think if you follow the task of saying, if someone wants to connect with you, send them a note back saying thank you or whatever that relationship might be. It's hard to do if you get a lot of things, but searching for a job is hard to do anyway.
Right.
So being active in our industry is much different than it was before. And most people that know me know that I've been very active in ASIS and have held several different roles. And then, of course, I'm an anti-ASIS basher. So if someone starts giving me a hard time about there's too many vendors at the chapter meeting, I tell them to change that and do something about that and get active and be visible in our industry. And yeah, I know it's difficult today, Scott, for the federal and law enforcement officers to jump out there without really knowing, what am I doing and how am I doing this? And I just remind them to, have a good profile, be active, comment where it's appropriate, post where it's appropriate. And, you and I both have several friends that are very active, and people that listen to this should check these people out. And one is that Eric,
Eric
Eric
Vento.
Bento.
Yep.
Yep, Eric Bento is a VNTO. Chuck Andrews in
Yep.
Texas with the hat. And you know what they say about people with a big hat like that? They say big hat, no cattle. So,
I would love to hear Chuck's comments on that.
but then there's others, and like Tim Wenzel at Facebook. I mean, Tim took on this kindness issue, and it's exploded.
Yep.
So, jumping into something like that where your name now becomes visible to others, and potentially, if you were looking for a particular position in a particular company, your visibility on the internet, particularly LinkedIn, there really isn't an alternative to that, is probably important because they want to see what you've contributed before and what you're contributing now, and what you're going to contribute as you go forward. So it's much different than it was. There's no question about that. But I'm a proponent of being engaged and being connected. And I remind people, if you're not connected and you get laid off tomorrow, you're in trouble.
That's
You're
right.
in big, because you're number one, you don't have a job and you don't have a pathway to another one yet.
No, I'm just going to apply for hundreds of jobs with one resume. The same resume, by the way, that I got my police job with, right? Yeah, no, not good. I love what you said at the beginning, which was we understand when folks, they don't want to have this online presence because they're worried about the bad things that can come from that. And what I tell folks that are getting ready to transition or thinking about it, about 6 months out, start taking the wrapper off of who you are and start getting out there and start networking and in total agreement with you. That's really the only way that you're going to find out about these jobs, about what's real out there, what people are really saying about the places that they worked. And it's great. I mean, I use it like a detective tool. I'm going to figure out who was at a role before somebody else. And, people leave jobs for a reason, some good, some bad. Find out what that's all about. In our industry, it is really small. As big as you said, ASIS is huge, but it's a small world, and everybody kind of knows everybody else, and find people who will connect you with other people. To your point, we talked about Eric earlier, Eric Vento, and I'm going to mark Eric and Tim and Chuck down in the comments on this. I'll flag them, so if people want to connect, I'd highly recommend that too. But Eric, for one, is out there, and he seamlessly will connect with anybody and connect you with people that he knows. So I've seen people go to Eric and ask for help or ask for, hey, can you connect me with somebody at this company or that company? And if they're in his network, he will do that. And likewise, I've done that. I'm sure you've done that, where people will ask us, hey, can you connect me with somebody? And I think that's what social media is there for, is to have that conversation, to be open, to have a dialogue. And to your point, I do really think that recruiters are looking for those kinds of things, if not recruiters, than the hiring manager. If your name is you're fortunate enough to be in that small group of folks that are going to be interviewed by the hiring manager. If I'm the hiring manager, that's one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at your social media. If you're open and open connector and you're open posting, I'm going to look at how do you post, how are you talking with people, are you argumentative, are you bashing people, are you saying inappropriate things. I see this all the time, by the way, from people that you and I both know. I don't know why we need to talk about politics on LinkedIn. It's bizarre to me. I don't comment on those things, but I see people do that. And as a hiring manager, those are the things that I'm looking for. Are you a good team player? Are you out there helping other people? Even when you need help, are you continuing to help others? And that's what's so special, I think, about the kindness game with what Tim and his crew are doing. And we're hearing from people in the kindness game. And I think there's a hashtag kindness game, so you can search that on LinkedIn. You can find all these videos that people are out there giving thanks. And this is one of the hardest times in American history, and people are out there giving thanks. And so I'll let you have the last word. Any additional words of wisdom there that you could share about your social network and social media?
Well, I think that just one last kind of comment about LinkedIn and recruiters. And generally, the people that Scott and I talk to are into their second career. So that means that they had a career, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, but in any event, they're a little bit older, and the recruiters are a little bit younger. And so the recruiters typically live their life with the device that's in front of them. And that's what we see today in the generation that's coming along. And I forget, it was the Gen Xers, but I think that's changed about 5 times now. So that's your competition, and
Right.
you have to conquer that, and you have to remember that, and you have to be visible, and you have to be networked. And it's okay to call Scott, or it's okay to call me and ask me something, or it's okay to call some of the other names that we mentioned. They're all there. They've been through this, and they're committed to it. And they said, you have a lot of friends. Call all your friends and tell them that you're out of work or whatever the case may be. And, I know I'm older, but I still hold out that a phone call is still good to do today, because typically there's an opportunity to leave a voice message on the other end. You can be somewhat personal about that. And then you can use your social media network as well, but reaching out one-on-one is still pretty valuable.
That's great. And we'll leave it there. Comment below. Send us stuff to talk about. We've got a list of things that we'll be talking about here in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate your thoughts on these topics, and have a great weekend. All right.
You too.